discuss it, you thought it was rejection. You thought the silence meant you weren't enough. That pulling away, the ghosting, the cold eyes, the dismissive energy, all of it was proof that you weren't lovable enough, worthy enough, strong enough to be chosen. You began rewriting your worth around their inability to connect. Question yourself, blame yourself, beg the universe for closure. But here's the truth that will change everything sometimes. The silence is rejection. Sometimes it's obsession. Hidden beneath the fear of vulnerability. You were never dismissed. You were never overlooked. You were never too much. You were seen so deeply, so intensely, that it shook something inside you. And because they've never learned how to hold love without control, without fear, without the need to run, they disappear. Not because you didn't mean anything, but because you meant everything. And they didn't know how to hold that kind of weight. Avoidants don't vanish because they don't feel. They vanish because they feel too much. They don't walk away because it's easy. They walk away because staying would mean being fully seen, and that terrifies them. You weren't imagining the connection. You weren't delusional for sensing something deeper. But you were mistaken about what it meant when they shut down. You thought it was indifference. You thought it was the end. But avoidance isn't apathy. It's armor. It's a coping mechanism built on years of self-protection. It's a reflex born from pain, from a deep-rooted belief that true intimacy is a trap, that love equals danger, that closeness leads to loss. So they run not from you, but from themselves, from the version of themselves that starts to awaken in your presence, from the tenderness they don't know how to handle, from the possibility that this time it might be real. And that real love might require more than they've ever given. And while they retreat into silence, you start collapsing under the weight of confusion. You overanalyze, you make excuses for them. You wait, you hope, you shrink. But hear this clearly, absence of clarity is not your cue to doubt yourself. It's your invitation to wake up. Because the story you've been telling yourself, that their distance is a reflection of your inadequacy, is a lie. It was never your job to earn the love of someone who doesn't know how to stay. It was never your purpose to fix someone who keeps running from their own heart. And it was never your destiny to chase ghosts in the hope they turn back into people. Their avoidance is not about your value. Their silence is not your sentence. It's their internal chaos, misread as calm. Their emotional dysfunction, misread as composure. Their suppressed obsession, misread as rejection. And that's the twist no one tells you sometimes. The people who act like they don't care are the ones who care the most. But they've buried that care so deeply beneath layers of fear, pride, and pain that even they can't access it without burning. So when they distance themselves, understand it's not a declaration of your worth. It's a window into their unresolved fear of connection. And if you stop taking it personally, if you stop translating their chaos into a flaw within you, you free yourself. Because this isn't about getting them back. It's about getting yourself back. This is about waking up to the truth that you were never rejected. You were simply dealing with someone who was too emotionally starved to hold the feast you offered. They weren't avoiding you. They were avoiding the intensity you triggered in them. And that intensity, that reflection, that mirror of depth, honesty, and love that you offered, that's not weakness, that's power. Now, breathe it. But feel that truth crawl up your spine. Let it crack open the lies you've been carrying. You were never the problem. You were the revelation they weren't ready for. And starting now, you stop waiting for permission to own your worth. They wear a mask, not to deceive you, but to survive themselves. Avoidants don't walk through life numb and cold because they don't feel. They walk that way because feeling threatens to unravel the walls they've spent years, maybe decades building just to stay intact. You think they're composed. You think they're detached. You see someone in control, someone unaffected, someone unmoved. But what you're really looking at is a fortress of avoidance, built brick by brick from broken trust, silent trauma, abandonment, and betrayal. Walls erected not to keep you out, but to keep themselves from falling apart. And here's what they won't say, not because they're hiding it from you, but because they don't even know how to admit it to themselves. They crave connection, deeply, desperately, but to them connection feels like danger. It feels like exposure, like weakness, like handing over a loaded weapon and trust someone else not to pull the trigger. So they push you away, not because they don't want you, because they want you too much. And that much wanting feels unbearable when you've never felt safe to want anything at all. They'll keep conversations surface level, not because they have nothing deeper to say, but because they're afraid that if they open their mouth, the truth might spill out like a flood they can't control. They'll stay emotionally distant, not because they lack emotion, but because their emotions are so intense, so overwhelming, they don't trust themselves to manage them without breaking down. They'll say they're just not ready, that they need space, that something doesn't feel right. But deep inside, what doesn't feel right is peace, because they've only ever known love through chaos, through fear, through the slow bleed of self-betrayal. And when you offer them something safe, something steady, something true, they don't recognize it as love. They recognize it as threat, and they retreat. You see, avoidance is not a lifestyle. It's a defense mechanism. It's emotional armor that once served a purpose, but now imprisons them. They're not heartless. They're not careless. They're not invincible. They're terrified. You're terrified of what you represent, of what you stir inside them, of the possibility that being fully seen might mean being fully hurt. And this is the paradox. They long for intimacy, but fear the vulnerability it demands. They crave closeness, but collapse under the weight of being understood. They dream of love, but dread being touched in places they've spent their whole life trying to bury. And so they perform. They wear the cool, calm, collected exterior. They play the part. They pretend they're unshaken. But underneath the silence, underneath the emotional distance, is a heart pounding behind locked ribs. You weren't imagining their pull toward you, but you also weren't imagining their fear of it. Because you didn't just offer love, you offered truth. You became a mirror, a reflection of all the emotional work they've avoided. And mirrors don't lie. They reveal. What you revealed scared them. You may be tempted to soften yourself, to quiet your light, to dim the intensity of your presence so they can stay comfortable. But that is not your job. Your job is not to make yourself smaller, to make them stay. Your job is to see the mask and refuse to wear one yourself. Because love should not feel like a performance. It should not feel like punishment. And it damn sure should not feel like hiding. Let them run if they need to. Let them build more walls if they must. But you keep standing in your truth. You keep speaking from your heart. You keep honoring the intensity that lives inside you. The very intensity they weren't ready for. Because one day, whether in this life or in their own quiet reflections, they will remember you. Not as the one who chased, but as the one who saw through the mask and loved yourself enough to walk away from it. Stop arguing with yourself about whether you were enough. Stop replaying conversations, questioning your tone, dissecting your words, wondering if you loved too hard, gave too much, felt too deeply. You didn't lose them because you were too much. You lost them because you finally touched a place inside them they've spent a lifetime protecting. And that kind of truth terrifies the emotionally unavailable. But let's get this straight, your worth is not on trial. Your value was never in question. And your capacity to love wasn't the problem, it was the threat. You weren't rejected because you were inadequate. You were rejected because you were powerful. Because you brought an emotional intensity they weren't prepared to receive, not because you were wrong, but because they were unready. That distinction matters. It matters because too many people like you carry the weight of someone else's fear like it's your flaw. But that ends here. You are not a second choice. You are not an emotional gamble. You are not a placeholder for someone still wrestling with their past. And you are not someone's unfinished lesson. You are the entire truth. And sometimes the truth is too loud for people still clinging to their lies. Avoidants don't disconnect from you because you lacked something. They disconnect because your presence demanded honesty. Your love asked for vulnerability. And when someone's identity is built on self-protection, they will always feel unsafe in the presence of someone who refuses to perform. They weren't used to someone who didn't play games. They weren't ready for someone who didn't manipulate, withdraw, or punish with silence. You offered consistency, and they only understood chaos. You spoke clearly, and they only knew how to decode mixed signals. You held them with grace, and they panicked because that kind of safety felt unfamiliar. But hear this now. Their inability to receive you was never proof that you were giving too much. It was proof that you were giving from a place they hadn't yet discovered within themselves. You cannot build intimacy with someone who fears being seen. You cannot force growth in someone who chooses the comfort of emotional numbness over the discomfort of transformation. And you cannot keep setting yourself on fire to light up someone else's shadows. Stop shrinking. Stop twisting yourself into silence. Stop apologizing for your capacity to feel deeply, to love boldly, to care without strategy. You were never meant to be palatable. You were meant to be profound. And here's what they'll realize one day, maybe too late, maybe in the silence of their own reflection, you weren't the storm. You were the shelter. You weren't chaos. You were clarity. You didn't abandon them. You simply stopped betraying yourself to make them stay. Because self-worth isn't earned by proving yourself to people who don't know how to receive. It's built by refusing to bend in places you were born to rise. You don't need to become more lovable. You don't need to be more patient, more quiet, more forgiving, more understanding of their wounds. You already are lovable, and your patience has limits. Your love does not exist to rescue. It exists to expand. If someone chooses to run from the very thing they claim to crave, let that be their contradiction to live with. Not yours to solve, because your worth is not a debate. It is a fact. And anyone who treats it like a question mark is simply not aligned with the version of you that refuses to beg for crumbs when you were always born to feast. Let them misunderstand you. Let them doubt. Let them go. You've got bigger things to do than convince broken mirrors of your reflection. They say they want love. They say they want connection. They say they want someone real, someone who sees through the surface, who understands without being told, who loves without conditions. And then you show up, and suddenly all that claiming stops, because what they said they wanted and what they're ready to hold are two entirely different things. They weren't prepared for you. You see, what they're used to, what they've rehearsed and normalized, is emotional survival, conditional affection, chasing the unavailable, hiding behind half-truths, living in cycles of longing and retreat. So when something stable walks into their life, something grounded, unshaken, emotionally alive, they don't relax. They panic. You were the calm they'd never known, the fire they couldn't contain, the kind of intensity that doesn't burn to destroy. But burns to reveal, they wanted warmth, but not the flame, but not the exposure. They wanted healing, but not the mirror. And make no mistake, you are a mirror, not just reflecting who they are, but who they could be if they were willing to face the parts of themselves they keep locked away. You activated something dormant in them, a part they didn't know they were still running from, and it scared them, because that part of them, the one that wants to be loved deeply, held openly, seen entirely, that part was never allowed to breathe freely. So when you loved them without control, when you stayed present without games, when you didn't punish, manipulate, or withdraw, they didn't feel safe. They felt exposed. And that exposure felt too vulnerable, too dangerous, too unpredictable. Because for someone who associates love with loss, presence with pressure, intimacy with pain, your steady presence felt like standing in the center of a wildfire. But here's the truth. You weren't burning them. You were burning everything false. You were the fire that revealed their mask, melted their defenses, and scorched the illusions they clung to. You were not chaos. You were clarity. But clarity demands honesty. And honesty terrifies those who haven't faced themselves. They fear the fire not because it hurts them, but because it challenges them to stop hiding, to stop playing small, to stop sabotaging everything beautiful they claim to want. And you were beautiful, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Because you stood in your truth without flinching, because you dared to love in a world full of armor and half-heartedness. You didn't offer fantasy, you offered depth. And depth is not comfortable for those who live on the surface. You didn't beg for affection, you embodied it. You didn't play hard to get, you were hard to forget. And that's what they'll realize, if not now, then eventually. That it wasn't the intensity of your presence that was too much, it was the lack of it in everyone else they meet after you. You weren't just another person passing through. You were a force, a shift, a disruption in their pattern. You were the fire they said they wanted, until they realized what fire really does. It doesn't just warm, it transforms. And transformation requires surrender. And surrender is the one thing they've never been able to do without fear. So let them fear, let them retreat, let them call it too intense, or too fast, or not the right time. You don't owe anyone comfort if it comes at the cost of your truth. You don't need to soften your flame to keep someone from running, because the ones who are meant for you will not just survive your fire. They will rise inside it with you. You are not here to be safe. You are here to be so real, so alive, so fierce in your love, that those still hiding from themselves have no choice but to awaken, or get out of your way who thought they forgot you. That the silence was the end, that they moved on, erased the bond, closed the door, and walked away without a second thought. But you were wrong. What looks like distance on the surface can sometimes be the loudest obsession in disguise. Avoidants don't show obsession the way you're used to seeing it. They won't chase. They won't confess. They won't cry in your messages or beg for one more chance. But they will think of you constantly. Their obsession doesn't come in waves of action. It comes in silence. In the way they remember the exact tone of your laugh, but pretend they never heard it. In the way they replay conversations while acting like you never existed. In the way they scan your life from afar, tracking your every move without saying a word. You think their distance means detachment, but that's the mask they wear to stay in control. Because real connection, it threatens that control. And losing control is their greatest fear. Not because they don't care, because they care too much and don't know what to do with it. You weren't just another person they met. You were the trigger, the shift, the unraveling they didn't see coming. Your love touched places inside them that had never been touched without consequence. It made them feel things they had spent years avoiding. And that's why they ran. Not because they didn't feel, but because feeling meant facing everything they weren't ready to confront. So they disappear, they withdraw, they go quiet, not to forget you, but to escape the gravity you created in them. And yet, even in that silence, you're still there. In their routines, in their thoughts, in the music they play but can't explain, in the moments they wish they could freeze and relive, but won't dare speak of. This is what no one tells you. Avoidants can obsess harder than anyone, but they obsess in the dark. Behind locked emotional doors, in private corridors of memory, in patterns that only they can see. They miss you, but they won't tell you. They long for you, but they'll show it in twisted ways. Detachment, indifference, avoidance. Because obsession for them is shameful. It means they've lost control. It means you've gotten too close. It means they've been seen. And instead of leaning in, they shut down. But here's where your power comes back. You don't want to wait for their confession. You don't need to stalk their silence for proof that you mattered. You know you did. You felt it. You lived it. You were the impact. They'll try to minimize it. They'll pretend it didn't shake them. But the ones who try the hardest to act indifferent are often the ones who felt it the deepest. They don't chase you, not because they've moved on, but because chasing would mean surrendering their power, would mean lowering the armor. It would mean facing the version of themselves they've spent their entire life suppressing. The vulnerable one, the one that feels, the one that wants. And that's not your job to fix. That's not your story to edit. That's not your battle to fight. Your job is to recognize the difference between attention and alignment, between obsession and action, between being remembered and being received. You don't need to keep showing up in places where your heart isn't held. You don't need to translate their confusion into a love story that never actually began. Obsession without courage isn't love. It's fear in disguise. And you didn't come this far to settle for emotional echoes in place of real connection. Let them think of you. Let them feel the burn of everything they couldn't say. Let them sit in the emptiness they created. And while they do, you rise. You rise in your clarity. You rise in your wholeness. You rise in the knowing that real love doesn't hide behind silence. It shows up. It speaks. It stays. And you are not here to be chased in secret. You are here to be chosen in the open. This is the line in the sand. This is where the story changes. Not because they finally showed up. Not because they apologized. Not because they gave you closure. But because you decided that you are the closure, because you realized the door that slammed in your face wasn't rejection. It was redirection. And now the waiting ends. The doubting ends. The narrative that you weren't enough. Burn it. You are not here to be half loved. You are not here to be misunderstood, second-guessed, or almost claimed by someone who doesn't even fully claim themselves. You are not here to keep shrinking, folding, bending backwards just to make broken people comfortable in their limitations. You were built for more. And this ache, this confusion, this craving for answers is not your downfall. It is your activation. Because you felt the sting of being abandoned while you were still giving. You've lived the H of showing up fully while someone else stayed hidden. And now you're done begging to be seen by people who close their eyes in fear when faced with real love. You are not a lesson. You are not a mirror for someone else's transformation. You are not a placeholder until they figure themselves out. You are not here to be almost. You are here to disrupt patterns, to break generational chains, to walk boldly in your truth and let your presence disturb the comfort of those who hide from theirs. They didn't choose you. Good. They weren't ready. Fine, they stayed silent while you were screaming with presence. Let that be their burden, not your blueprint, because now it's about you. It's about the version of you that's no longer performing for love, the version that doesn't wait for approval, the version that no longer carries shame in being intense, emotional, bold, or whole. It's about the version of you who rises, not in spite of the silence, but because of it. Because silence taught you how to listen to your own voice. Distance taught you how to love yourself louder. Abandonment taught you that home is not found in another person. It's built within your soul. So this is your call to rise. Not softly, not slowly, but like the ground is cracking beneath your feet and the sky is ready to split open with your name. Written thunder. This is your call to stop romanticizing potential and start choosing energy that matches yours. To stop pouring into people who bring empty cups and leave you dry. To stop over-explaining your worth to those who only hear their fear echoing back at them. Let them go. Let them linger in their obsessions and regrets. Let them stay where it's safe, silent, and small. But you walk forward, you choose presence, you choose alignment, you choose yourself loudly, radically, unapologetically. Because healing doesn't always look like making peace with the past. Sometimes it looks like becoming the person the past never saw coming. So here's what you do now: you stop waiting. You stop hoping they'll see what they ran from. You stop replaying conversations in your mind, trying to understand why someone didn't have the courage to meet your truth. And you start building, creating, healing, living. You fill your lungs with fire, your spine with steel, and your heart with a kind of love that no longer pleads to be earned, because it already knows it's enough. They may still think of you. They may still obsess. But that's no longer your story. That's no longer your weight. You don't rise to prove anything. You rise because staying small was never your destiny. So rise for the version of you who waited, for the version of you who broke, for the version of you who kept showing up even when no one stayed. You are the storm they tried to outrun. You are the fire they couldn't hold. You are the truth they weren't ready for. And now you walk into a life where you no longer have to dim to be loved, because the world needs you bright, and you're just